Welcome to our channel. Today we are going to explain a futuristic sci-fi thriller movie called Archive. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. In Japan, George Elmore finds himself running in a remote area far from the city until he finally enters a high-tech research center where he is welcomed by an air robot named J2. While trying to fix his lab, George receives help from J2 and also meets another ad robot named J1. Later that evening, George talks to a girl who looks like his wife Julia, but their conversation is abruptly cut off. George recalls his memories with Julia and she urges him to turn on the auto-driving mode, but George hesitates as he doesn't trust the robot since he didn't design it. Despite this, it's evident that they love each other very much. The next day, George wakes up to a hologram message for his superior Jake, who instructs him to improve security due to potential threats. George hides the fact that J2 has spoken with him, and after the meeting ends, J2 questions him as to why he lied. George explains that he doesn't want Jake to use J2 for research. It's clear that George has a passion for his work in AI robots, and J2 shows affection for J1. That night, George enters a lab where Julia's memories are transferred to another ad robot named J3, which is advanced enough to resemble a human closely. The next day, George goes out to fix the tower, and while fixing it, J2 also helps him. J2 looks angry at George as George didn't took help from her while working late at night on J3. J2 now tells him that she knows what he is doing in the lab. They both started to argue while J2 tells George that she knows he is making another like her. George gets enraged and tells J2 that J3 is just different, not better than her. It looks like J2 can feel emotions and she is jealous of J3. George tells J2 to get back as she is getting wet. At night, Georgiakin starts working and tries to turn on J3. J3 suddenly wakes up and starts screaming. George sees that she is in shock and tries to calm her down. He later sleeps while working in the lab and soon wakes up. J2 plays good music for George to freshen his mood. He comes out from the lab and suddenly sees a dog inside. While the main door is open, he gets shocked as someone has breached the security system. He tries to fix the door while J2 helps him while working. He tells J2 that he needs her legs for working on his project for J3, but it looks like J2 was not happy about it. George tells her that they have limited resources. Soon George sees two vehicles approaching. He talks to the man and allows them to enter. George tells his robots J1 and J2 to get back and not to talk. When they come, they too try to investigate the mission, but George hides and tells them that he cannot communicate with her. The man then tries to take data from the server, and after a while he tells him that the security system is in a bad condition and that they have to move them to another place. George gets enraged and soon their senior tells George to work and leaves. George now enters the lab and tests J3. She is now calm and tells George that she is feeling confused. George tries to ask her if she remembers him. Suddenly, J3 gets upset and George tries to hibernate her, but she begs him to stop. George also tries to touch her, but J3 stopped him. J3 is not feeling good, but George asks her that she needs to be calm and that the software in her is finding patterns. George shows her the world outside and tells her that this is her home. George also promises to free her after she gets control of her emotions. On the other hand, J2 is standing outside with a toy robot in her hand. Feeling alone, George wakes up and starts testing J3. He is happy to see that J3 can also taste and feel everything. George now performs other tests while J2 enters. J3 asks George about her and George explains that he made 3 of them and each one of them is better than another. 3 also tells him that she is also dreaming of something for which George gets happy. Soon J1 comes while George tells J3 to meet her sister. J3 notices that J1 doesn't have hands while George tells her that he progressed very fast as he did not have time to fabricate J1's arms. George tells J3 that he is working on her and that in some day she will not need any batteries or anything else and she will be independent. J3 asks about J1 not moving like normal robots. George now shows her the growth of J1 and J2 and how they both stopped at a certain limit, but J3 is limitless. At night, George starts dreaming about his good days with his wife Julia. George soon wakes up and gets ready to fix the security tower outside. George also gives J3 a phone to communicate with him in any emergency. While working on the tower, George suddenly gets a call from J3. She tells him to get back if she's not feeling good. George also sees a drone flying and decides to come back. George fixes the power source error and at night he moves towards the city to meet A man as her superior told him to get new security equipment. George meets the man in the cafe. The man looks dangerous and suspicious. He shows him pics of him while he was sleeping. The man tells George that Heat is being watched and gives him a back. He also tells him to use this in only emergencies. On the other hand, J2 is trying to create a mask, and as she gets info about George, she broke the mask. George on the way starts remembering his wife Julia. He tells her that he is being selected for a project in Japan. It looks like Julia is happy. Soon they got hit by a car. He later wakes up in the lab and finds out about the emergency alarm. He quickly turned off the alarm, moved towards the lab and sees J3 missing. George gets upset and starts running towards the room. When he opens the emergency box, the door closed. George sees his superior on screen. He hides the truth and tells him that everything is fine and that he had opened the box mistakenly. Looks like George is hiding his research from his superior to make a robot, just like his wife Julia, as his wife had died in the accident. The man now tells him that if he opened the box again, a research team will come. George closes the box. While he opened the doors, he takes the car and gets outside in search of J3. He travels too far, but couldn't find anyone. George is very upset, and soon he started remembering his wife Julia. While his wife asks him if there is any way he can save his mind to transfer it to any robot so that he could talk to her after her death, George tells her that there is a way of saving it, but only in analog. George started finding J3 with the help of the drones and sees a small toy robot on the ground. He picks it up and goes back to the facility. It looks like that J2 has done something suspicious. After coming back, George sees J1 outside. He gets her back inside and tells both of them to not go outside as water could damage their system. He then again decides to go outside and search for J3, but as he opened a cupboard in the garage, J3 falls on him. He gets happy and tries to talk to J3, but she starts screaming and George somehow manages to calm her down. J3 now knows that George is transforming his wife's memory into her. George promises her that he will tell her everything. He shows her the archive of his wife Julia, and he planted a biochemical thing in her mind. He also tells J3 how he managed to take the analog signal from Julia's mind and he used it in J1 J2, and it keeps improving. George now tells J3 that Julia was perfect for him. J3 tells George that J2 was the one who moved her out. George gets enraged and tells J2 that she is jealous of J3 and powered her down. George also takes out J2's legs and starts transforming them for J3 to complete the project. He worked day and night and finally gets ready for the legs. After attaching the legs, he also transforms J3 and gives it the skin of Julia. J3 finally wakes up and sees the complete version of herself. She gets excited to get the skin as well as her feet. She travels outside and sees nature. She can feel emotions and feels the water. On the other hand, George fixes J2's legs, but in an older version. J2 requests for moving out and gets upset about her legs. She gets enraged that he has given it to J3 and she begs George to return her legs, but he tells her that he will make the new ones for her. J2 goes outside and after coming back gets into hibernate mode and falls on the ground. George and J3 were enjoying their breakfast while talking in French. A1 sees J2 on the ground and reports it to George. George rushes towards J2 and gets her back into the charging pod. The next morning, J3 starts enjoying the music and started dancing while George returns from jogging and saw her dancing. George also joins her and they both start enjoying it. J2, on the other hand, sees them and decides to move out. She says her final goodbye to J1 and leaves the facility. J2 had now decided to commit suicide. As she goes inside the big river, George sees J2 is offline and started searching for her, but couldn't find her. J1 J3 and George now bury the J2 box to give her respect. At night, J3 starts remembering George and Julia's love. She gets emotional and decides to get close to George. She started touching George slowly. George turns himself to the other side and suddenly wakes up. He gets shocked seeing J3 in the bed and orders her to get out. J3 now remembers Julia as she was pregnant and gets upset. She also remembers the accident when Julia died and gets unconscious. George takes her to the lab and J3 wakes up and tells George that she remembers everything now about the accident and that she was pregnant. It looks like George has finished the project. George now calls his superior and lied to them that he has a problem with the archive and cannot get through it. He also tells them that the person before who came for the checkup and has seen the fault, but George gets shocked to hear that no one was sent by them. George has no time to escape the place because the company has sent security to arrest him as he has lost J2 and hasn't told them. G3 breaks the hologram while seeing the superior. Enraged George takes the axe and goes to cut off the power supply of the bridge. On the other hand, J3 sees the secret archive where George has placed Julia's brain inside and can talk to her. G3 takes the phone and talks to Julia. She keeps asking for George while G3 tells her that she will take care of George when she will be gone. George gets enraged seeing J3 talking to her. George talks to Julia and tells her he has to transfer her to J3 because her signal is very weak. George tells J3 the truth, that he has designed her for Julia and he has to make sure that she can feel everything. J3 is shocked to hear that George says sorry to J3, but suddenly the chopper shows up in the security system. George opens the emergency box and sees a gun inside. E3 takes the gun while Gyro tries to close the doors manually. G3 is upset and points the gun at George while George tries to explain everything. G1 comes in front trying to save George. George shows love to J1 and stands still in front of J3. He tells her that it was his fault as he was driving the car and the only one thing now is J3 as she can save Julia. G3 gets emotional and decides to give her life for George. The process starts and suddenly a chip enters J3's brain. She screams and gets unconscious and George tries to wake her up desperately while the last door opens. George sees no one outside. Looks like George has planned everything. In the end, Julia wakes up and George calms her down. In the end, she gets happy with George, but suddenly George finds out about the call on the archive and gets shocked. Julie on the call tells him that she misses him and she loved her a lot. George also hears her daughter and looks like it is not the end. Later, Julia is seen leaving the company with her daughter. Subscribe to see more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.